Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back again to another episode of As I Live and Grieve. I hope you've all been doing well. I hope you've been moving forward as we always suggest you do. I hope you have your support networks around you, and I hope your days are looking a little brighter. Another great guest today. With me today is John Wenderlein. I hope I pronounced it correctly. He has been a hospice chaplain, and he has a very intriguing perspective, I believe, of the topic of grief. So without wasting any more time, hi, John, and thanks for joining us this evening.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, too, for allowing me to come on. You know, when I set out on this journey here about a year plus ago, after I wrote my first book, I said, you know, if I can affect one person, if I can take one person in my life's travels and make them realize it's going to be okay, that I've done my job. So again, I want to thank you guys for letting me to come on and just run my mouth.
Absolutely. And I have to truly believe that there's going to be more than one person that's going to benefit from our upcoming conversation.
Right.
So to get us started, John, would you please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself? Who is John?
Well, John is married for a very long time to a lovely bride, living in the middle of Florida, a little town called DeBerry. I haven't always been in this profession, but I probably 20, 25 years have wanted to do this thing after coming out of seminary, and the Lord just blessed me later in life to do that. I work currently as a hospice chaplain. I wouldn't do anything else in the world. In fact, I have to tell you, when people read my little name tag or they ask me what I do for a living, I say, oh, I'm a chaplain. They go, oh, how wonderful. When I say I'm a hospice chaplain, they go, oh, not so wonderful. But you know, I just can't imagine not doing it. I just can't imagine. It's just such a, a glorious thing.
Yeah, I agree. Now, for our listeners that might be international or might not have listened real closely, you are a hospice chaplain, not a hospital chaplain.
Correct.
Could you explain to our listeners a little more specifically, what is a hospice chaplain? What is hospice?
Well, you know, it's been a misnomer for years that many people believe that a hospice chaplain is nothing short of a minister or a pastor. Now, I am a minister, pastor ordained, and I have a master's degree from a seminary. But what a hospice chaplain really is someone who walks into a room with a patient who's been given maybe not such good news and find wherever they're at spiritually, emotionally, take all those aspects into it and try to, you know, as best I can tell you, take their hand and walk them to this last journey, the Bible says this last season of life. And that's what we do. We are very concerned about, because it's hospice, what is called palliative care. And what that simply means is we want none of our patients in pain, and that's no pain till the end. So not a hospital chaplain. I've worked it for one and loved that. But hospice to me is just so much more rewarding.
Right. Hospice is near and dear to my heart, as I know it is to Kelly. She and I have both worked in nursing homes. I have done substantial volunteer work for hospice homes in my local community. And my own mother was placed on hospice. Hospice is an approximate 6 months of the last month's season. I love that phrase even better, that word for it. The last season of our life. It's approximately when the medical team has deemed that you have about 6 months of life left. And I say approximately because things change.
Absolutely.
And even though you might not think it possible, there are people who are placed on hospice that actually begin to thrive.
Absolutely.
And I love to think that that's because of the level of compassionate care and support that they receive themselves as patients, but that they also see on the faces and demeanor of their immediate family, because hospice also supports family.
Absolutely.
It's not just for the patients.
No.
So,
The fact is, most hospice organizations will stay in touch with caregivers, family members, up to 13 or 14 months after the patient has passed. And you talk about, I've had multiple times in the years I've been doing this where I've had to go to sweet little ladies or young, sweet little men and say, we're going to have to take you off hospice. And they're disappointed because they've been taken care of so well. Many times what we don't realize is sometimes it's a misdiagnosis of medications, and then working against each other can cause trouble. So what happens is, and as we start to care for them better and they start to get, around the clock type care, they improve.
yeah.
And, we have to come to them and say, hey, look, we love you, but we're going to have to, come back now,
Yes.
So
yes.
it's a funny situation. I have to go with nurses sometimes and have that conversation with patients, and it's people don't realize.
Right. It does happen, and it can be very confusing for the family. And it was great that you pointed out also that even after death, that hospice will continue to support the family. Many people I have heard from say they've never gotten that additional support. So if your experience is one of having hospice support your loved one and your family, you can reach out to them. If for some reason they don't reach out to you, you are free to reach out to them and say, what can you offer us for bereavement support? And they will tell you what they can do for you. They also can give you lists of other resources in your community. So you have to continue to advocate. Don't stop. Okay, I want to shift for a minute. Now, as we have loved ones that have chronic illnesses and they've been deemed terminal and they get to the point where hospice is an option, the medical team generally, or social worker, or the chaplain will all be involved in a conversation telling the family that you are eligible for hospice care. This is what it is. It's an option. It's not mandatory at all. So they will say to the family, do you want hospice care for your loved one? And the family can opt for, yes, I do. At that point, hospice will kick in with their benefits and their support, and a chaplain visits are one of the benefits of hospice support. About how often do you visit someone on hospice? Is there a routine you have?
Well, the government we work for, who pays for this care, requires that we visit within a certain amount of time, for me, it's within every 60 days. But I can never imagine going 60 days without seeing them. My initial contact with the patient will always cause me to build that visitation rapport. I have a couple patients I saw daily. I have patients I see weekly. I have some I don't see, but every 15 or 20 days, never 60. But we follow guidelines, but I follow my heart. We have care centers that you talked about, you volunteered at. We have several of those locations, and, it's just a different game there. There we see them every day. Mm-hmm. Every day we visit our patients because they are coming to the actual end. They are no longer able to take care, and their body functions are starting to change. And so they have a nurse. We typically, with the company I work for, has a nurse for every 4 patients round the clock, and is, of course, a doctor who's available by phone 24 hours a day. Right. So I had a sweet lady ask me one time, she says, Chaplain, why is the first thing out of your mouth, how am I feeling? Am I in pain? And I paused for a second. Now, I had been visiting her for quite a while. And I said, well, sweet lady, I love you too much for you to be in pain. And I'll tell you, if you're in pain, we're not doing our job. So exactly. I can't do that. So it's just a wonderful thing.
It is. It truly is. And for the family, we have talked many times on this podcast about some of the different types of grief. And at one point, we talked about anticipatory grief. I've talked about it personally because my husband died of a brain tumor, and we had been given the diagnosis, and we knew the end was coming. We just didn't know when.
Right.
So I know I started this process called anticipatory grief. I was shocked beyond belief when, once he died, I was devastated. It was like that anticipatory grief never happened.
Right.
There might have been perhaps just a a moment when I felt to myself, thank goodness he's not in pain anymore. And then as quickly as that happened, I was grieving, just as if it had been traumatic.
Of course. Grieving in itself is, and you and I both know, is a process. And no two people start the grieving process the same. In fact, yes, they don't end the same. The only common bond that I've noticed over the many years I've been doing this, is that I have not found a caregiver or a family member that haven't, in some way, no fault of their own, felt guilt.
Yes.
Felt that it's the woulda, coulda, shoulda in life that haunt them. We shoulda, we coulda, But I must have that conversation with many of my patients' family members time and time again. I try to have that as much as they'll take, because I also tell them that grieving isn't a start-stop process. Grieving requires it. Sometimes grieving takes a lifetime. A funny thing happened years and years ago. A sweet lady who lost her husband, and he had a tumor, also not a brain tumor, but she'd come to me, after he was gone, and said, Chaplain, I'm getting such a hard time from my sister. And I said, well, I met her. Of course, I've met the whole family. And I said, well, what do you mean a hard time? She said, well, she keeps telling me I need to get over it. And I said, well, you and I have known each other for 8-9 months, right? She goes, yeah. And I said, you know me pretty well, right? She says, yeah. I said, well, let me give you a spiritual thing to tell her. And she goes, well, what's that? I tell her to be quiet. She won't be quiet. Give her my phone number. Because, and then on the flip side, Kathy, I will have nurses call me and say, Chaplain, I need you to come visit this lady, this patient, her family's in town, and they're not happy. And I'll go, oh, so I'll walk into a room with a husband and wife, and, and this is a situation with the son and the daughter-in-law, and they had flown a great distance because the nurse had said, hey, you better come. It seems like it might be close. Well, they were upset because she hadn't passed yet, because they had things they needed to do.
Oh, my goodness.
So, I get the full spectrum of
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. And I love these stories. Can you tell us a few more?
Well, my stories, I've had the opportunity to have a few printed, and of course I've got them in a couple books, but I could tell you a real quick story about what I like to do. I currently work in the nursing care business, primarily visiting patients in nursing homes, and you would be familiar with that, Kathy. You said you did that.
Yes.
You and your daughter did that.
Yeah.
And I have a running rule with all the nurses and all the care centers or all the centers, everywhere I walk into, whether they are or whether we are being paid for their care, if they notice a patient that might need a prayer or just a visit, to let me know. Well, I came into a nursing home. I visited a lot, and a long-term nurse had been there a long, long time. God bless her. And she said, oh, Chaplain, you're here. I said, oh, yeah, of course. I've come to see one of our patients. She said, oh, can you go see Miss Margaret? I said, Miss Margaret. She goes, yeah, you don't know her, but she's right down, she's 3 doors down. And I said, well, let me get done with my patient and I'll go see her. Well, walk through Margaret's door, and the room's dark, and I can see Miss Margaret laying there in and out of sleep. So I grab a chair. She doesn't know me at all. And she says, well, hello. And I said, well, hello, sweet lady. I put a chair by her bed and we start to talk. She, as you know, they put family photographs all over around them. She's just littered with the family around her. But there's no one there now because they all live in another state. So as we're having a conversation, she's going to sleep, in and out of sleep. I remember finally saying, well, sweet lady, I'm going to just say a quick prayer, and then I'm going to leave you. She barely said okay. And, Kathy, I remember I was holding her hand, which is a tiny little hand, and I put her hand back down beside her. And when I got up, there was just enough light in the room for me to really be able to catch her when I opened the light of the door, and she wasn't with us no more.
Oh, my goodness.
I went out and I said to the nurse, I said, you know what? I'm not a doctor, but can you go check, sweet lady? And sure enough, she was gone. So I do not believe in accidents.
No.
And I don't believe in luck. Luck doesn't play a part in my life. So, and I have dozens of stories of just like that. Just wonderful things and wonderful times. So that's just a short little story, but I have many more.
That's a beautiful story. It really is, because it's as if she was waiting for just that, for someone to come spend a little bit of time with her and talk, to kind of ease her into that transition. That's never far away.
Yeah, that's right. Your family was too far away. They were coming. But, when a patient gets close, you'll find, and again, I'm going to go back to your nursing home experience. There's always TV on. They're always playing music. I tell the family, I said, they're convinced that the loved one can't hear them no more. And I go, no. Talk to your doctor. I know the scripture talks about that being the last thing gone, but sit there and tell stories about vacations, about trips, I have walked into rooms and noticed the countenance, the body language of that patient relax.
Yeah.
Just relax. Because it was a familiar voice, a voice that they loved, much like maybe you went there with your husband. Yeah. The only thing that would relax them was you to hold the hand, hold him and speak to her.
Mm-hmm. That was exactly it. And I know I've told on this podcast before, but it's one of the memories that is probably the most precious to me. And I had, of course, been told in the nursing home and everything that their hearing exists, even though they themselves may not really be aware. They may not be conscious. And Tom was having difficulty breathing. I really felt very strongly when I came into his room that morning that this was the day. This was his last day. And I spoke with the nurses and I said, he's got kind of a rattly, raspy breath and he's kind of gurgly. And she said, yes, you're right. And I said, okay. And I had been watching some of the modeling on his body and I had seen that progressing as well. Everything that I kind of gleaned from my experience in the nursing home. So I kind of tucked myself up on the edge of the bed next to him, and I leaned my head down, and I was just kind of murmuring and talking in his ear. And I can't remember what I was saying, but I know at different times I was telling him that everything was fine. He had done a great job of preparing things so that I would be taken care of, and I was so grateful for that. And he knew that I was an independent person, always had been, always would be. I would be fine. I had my daughters. I had my family. I had all kinds of support, and all would be okay, that he could finally accept what was happening to him.
That's right.
And then at some point in the morning when I was still babbling, he took his last breath.
Amen.
And I remember thinking on my way out to the car, I stopped and I thought to myself, of course, for years, he had said to me, every time we get in a conversation, you always have to have the last word.
Well, that's why
that memory just made me laugh.
Sure.
That I had the last word. Darn it, he was right.
And you're absolutely right. When we talk about a patient being able to hear. I have a quick little story. I was called to a nursing home again, a new patient. I walked into the room and there was a woman, probably my age, maybe in her 60s, and she was shaving this man who was an older man. So I assumed either it was an assistant or a helper, maybe a relative. Well, sure enough, it was his only daughter. She said Dad was a Marine, and he couldn't stand to have nubs on his face. So anyway, we were having a conversation. We talked about his World War II military career. We talked about life. And I said, well, is there anything I can do that will make it any better for you? She said, well, the saddest thing is the last 2 weeks, Dad and I have had no conversation. She said, I know Dad's coming to an end. And he just can't hear me when I tell him I love him. And I said, that's not true. And she goes, oh yeah, he was always kind of that Army sergeant kind of guy.
Right.
I said, well, so we talked a little longer, Kathy, and I said, well, gotta go. So I reached over and grabbed his right hand, and put my hand on my shoulder. I've always been a person who has to touch when I pray or touch when that's just part of it. And I remember praying, and I said, Pete was his name. I said, Pete, your sweet daughter just wants to have one more conversation with you, and she just can't seem to do it. But she says you don't hear what she's saying. And you and I both know that's not true. And as God is my witness, and I'm not a hokey pokey spiritual kind of guy in that way. I'm a very conservative person, but he raised up his left hand and she grabbed it and held it. Now he never said a word, but he was there. He was there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're whispering into your sweet husband's ears, and you could tell he was relaxing.
Yep.
It's all part of process. It's all part of the.
Yep, it is indeed. It is indeed. Wow. I love listening to your stories, and they bring tears to my eyes because I know I have seen the benefit of just a few words.
Amen.
To someone who is dying. I also am very passionate about a few words to the family.
Absolutely.
Once that death has occurred. Can you maybe give us an example of how you've supported family after a death?
Well, I've had the opportunity to do many funerals, of course. Not that we do them as part of our service. We do them to do them. You have to live close to the family. But several families I've stayed in touch with long after. One in particular I remember called later in the week, got called to a house. I met at the door with a woman probably in her mid-40s, and she said, he's back here. And it was her husband. He had had many strokes and, combination of things, and they didn't expect him to make it. Well, when I came into the house, there was two college-age kids, a young girl, a young man. And I said hello as I walked by him, and I walked in, and I had conversation with him, but he wasn't talking to me. And I said to her, I said, if he should regain consciousness, you call me. I don't care what day it is. Now, we work 5 days a week. I'm on call at nights, at the hospital or as a rotating basis. But, I'm a 5-day guy. But I said, if he should wake up for some reason, you call me. Well, guess what? Sunday morning, he was awake. And he not only was awake, he was up and eating. And I walked in the house, and there he was sitting in a chair. And I said, what's going on? He goes, I know that voice from somewhere. I said, well, on Thursday. And we started to talk. And I said, is there anything, that you want to resolve, before you pass? Not that I think you're going to pass now, because I could beat you to that. We don't know that.
Right.
And he said, I'd like to have a conversation with my children, a better one, because you get to see the tension or the unknown tension in their faces. And I know what you're talking about. There was this horrible, twisted, not angry, but just excitable face. And they just didn't know what was going on. And do you know, he passed away on Wednesday. But do you know, he pulled both of them aside and told them how much he loved them and how little he was of them and that it was going to be okay. Yeah. And then he laid down and went to sleep. And back to the way he was the Thursday before, and then he passed away. So I got the opportunity to stay in touch with his children, and finish college, and they both said, it was the greatest thing in the world that we could have that conversation with our father, because that's going to stay forever. So
sure. Yeah,
we don't know.
Those things do. Yep, exactly. Now I want to go back to something I think you said. Did you say, we were talking about hearing being the last sense to go, that even though someone is not responsive, chances are they can still hear your voice. Did you say that there was something in scriptures that related to that?
Scripture tells us to be silent and know that I'm with you always, which tells me that in our quiet time, in our silent time, he is just as much with us as if we were talking. So nothing changes about our relationship with Christ, even though the flesh is dying, the spirit is still strong. So that's what I always make reference to.
I so appreciate that, because I'm familiar with that line from Scripture, but I have not had that perspective of that line.
I think I don't want to go too far biblically, but
okay, it's okay.
Well, you can take the 3 years that our Lord Jesus Christ walked this earth, and you can take all the education I've gotten and all the education we'll ever get, and it all breaks down to one simple thing. And the simple thing is, when he rose again, he hunted Peter down. What did he ask Peter? He said, Peter, do you love me? And it took Peter three times to get it right, because that last time was a sacrificial love. So if we can figure out every move the Lord makes, whether it's we see the benefits or not, because we still live in this world, we have to know that he loves us. So when a patient gets close, and there are very spiritual people, I had a patient today that I don't normally visit. One of my nurses who worked with me on another team called me and said, can you go see this sweet lady, our chaplains, on vacation? I said, absolutely. So I walk in, and it's a room full of Christianese things, got things on the wall, and I walk in I go, hey, and of course she's at 10%. We know that's 10% vulnerability. You know what that means.
Yeah.
And I say, hey, sweet lady, how are you doing? I've come here with the honor to pray with you. Or pray for you. And how are you doing now? She's completely unconscious. Well, it wasn't a minute into my prayer that her legs started to twitch, her eyes opened up, and she said, hello. And I said, hello to you. I said, how are you? Of course, she never had, that was all she had in her. But she wasn't gone. But the point I'm making is her hearing was so vibrant, even though she was at 10%, even though and you talked about modeling. You watched your husband model. And most people don't know what that is, but you've probably talked about it. That's our nurses' clear sign that the end is coming. Yeah. So I listen carefully to my nurses. They do not know the exact time, only our Lord knows. But when they call me, I come. In fact, one more little quick story. I remember, again, a nurse on another team calling me, and she says, Chaplain, you don't usually visit this sweet lady, but she's only been on for a week. Can you come see her? She doesn't have long. Man, I stopped what I was doing and turned around and went towards her house. I met at the door with her. What I found out later was his daughter-in-law, and she's just been crying. She's got this big puffy crying eyes, and she said, oh, Chaplain, you're here. And I said, sure. So we walk up a flight of stairs, one up, I guess you call it a house. I look at the other room, and there's a lady who's about, if she's 70 pounds and 4'5", and she's in the typical old lady's gown, that you can only buy old lady stores. But she's right. and she's in this chair I could fit in, but she looks like a little dust speck. So I walk in, and she's asleep. I walk, and I take an end table from next to that chair, and I set it off to the side, and I set my tiny rumpus on the ground, and I reach over and grab her hand. Now, she's still sleeping or unconscious, and I say, hey, sweet lady, how are you? And she looked up at me, and she goes, well, is it time yet? And I said, is it time yet? I said, and I, never know exactly what they mean, but she would have been probably, sure. So I said, is it time yet? Is it time yet for you and I to go to a good place to eat or go dancing? I was trying to make light.
Sure.
No. Now, she doesn't know me. No clue.
Right.
But she says, I'm just tired. I just want to go. I said, well, sweet, you'll go in your own time. So I think I said goodbye to her. I gave the daughter-in-law a hug who buried her son, her husband, maybe something. So everybody was gone. It was a sweet lady taking care. Anyway, I got about 2 miles down the road, and my nurse called me and said, can you turn around? She's gone. So you just don't know.
No, you don't.
It's the most exciting part of my life is to be there at the last moment.
Yeah. Well, you can't see. I know the listeners can't see the tears in my eye, the goosebumps on my arms. I could listen to your stories all day. Me too. John, it's not just the stories themselves, it's the words you use. It's in the spaces between the words is the compassion that you offer your patients. It's just touching and so beautiful. I fear, though, that our time is winding down.
Quickly.
It always does. It always does. But what it also means is it usually leaves our listeners wanting more, which means that we're likely to invite you back again for more new stories. But before I actually start to sign off, I want to check with Kelly and see if there was anything Kelly wanted to ask you or say.
I just want to comment on how thankful I am for you, that these families have access to you, that the patients have access to you, because it doesn't take much sometimes to just let someone know it's okay or they're okay. Sometimes all they need is those words, you're okay.
That's right. Isn't that amazing?
Yes. I've been leaning forward more and more to my phone as we've been on this podcast, just wanting to hear more and more. So thank you for being that voice and that comfort for those patients and families. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate the conversation. I in my heart, I believe that if we can help one person transition to that last season of life. I'm reminded of the song that I used to listen to when I was a kid. I haven't always been with the Lord. He's been with me. I just didn't know it until I was in my 30s. But it was called Turn.
I love that.
Ecclesiastes.
Yes.
There's a time to live, and a time to die. There's a time to love, a time to cry. We were born. We get a diaper put on our butts. and we run towards the grave. And somewhere in all that, we have to find joy. There should be as much joy as saying goodbye as saying hello. So, and it's funny, Kelly, because you said what I say almost every patient I deal with, and I've got a couple hundred of them now, and is that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
Wow.
But it's going to be okay.
Well, and I love what you just said, how we're born, we have a diaper put on our butts, and then we run toward the grave, because that's what life feels like. It goes so fast. So sad.
I've never had a 95-year-old woman tell me, Chaplain, this life has been so slow.
Yeah.
It's just dragging. I can't believe it. It seems like it's been 10,000.
Well, before I sign off, John, I want to take the opportunity and turn the microphone over to you and let you speak directly to our listeners without me interrupting you with questions. Go right ahead.
Well, if I had one thing to tell your listeners, like Kelly said, it's going to be okay. There are good people out there. I tell the people that I work with, I only work with optimists. I never work with pessimists. There are no pessimists in the hospice business. There are only optimists. Even though we know the outcome, we know that there's still hope. And hope is what keeps us alive. So I've spent the last 5, 6, 8 years just compiling probably a couple, 300 stories. I've written a couple books. They're not expensive books. You can get them on Amazon. I have a website, remembermejw.com. Go there. The first book is called Remember Me, End-of-Life Stories as Seen Through the Eyes of a Hospice Chaplain. The second book is called The Late Honor. It deals with our Vietnam veterans and what they're going through at the end of their life. Never given the honor that was due them.
My husband was a Vietnam vet.
Well, let me tell you, if you will send me your address, physical address, I'll send you my 2 books. And you can just
yeah. Oh my gosh,
that's a whole other story with our veterans.
I'm not getting them. Oh my gosh, that one really touches me.
I want to have the opportunity to again tell people it's going to be okay. I can't imagine doing anything else. Haven't always done this in my life, but in my first book tells my story about how I came to do this. So, but that's really all I got. Grab my books, go to my web page. Now I'm going to be able to, whatever you call it, blog. People are going to be able to talk to me. And, I want your listeners to know that I can sense the passion in you and your daughter, and that, they should listen, because at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure we're not getting rich. Not rich money-wise.
Right. The richness I receive is the listeners that I know have been helped. And I may not hear from all of them, but when I hear from one of them, I can't tell you how rewarded I feel.
Well,
I truly do.
It makes everything you do worth doing.
Absolutely.
Well, with our Vietnam veterans, I talk about all they're looking for is an attaboy. Thank you. Yeah. And when they came back, they weren't treated that way. And I could go through a story about that, but hopefully I've been complete. I can't think of anything else I need to say except, have me back on again and we'll tell some more stories. And
guaranteed.
We'll try not to cry together, but
crying is good. Crying is good. I have said on this podcast numerous times that I know now that I'm going to grieve for the rest of my life.
You will.
My grief has and will continue to change.
Yes.
My life has and will continue to change as my life and my grief just kind of merge together. It is a part of me. And at this point, I can honestly say I wouldn't have it any other way.
No, I tell you, sometime in our life, Kathy, and I don't really know when it is, we start to reflect. We just start to ponder what the life we had previous. And we do that until the day we stop breathing. We start to reflect. One more quick thing, if I can.
Absolutely. Have
you watched a movie? I'm not trying to promote a movie, but there's a movie called Saving Private Ryan.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Love it. I love it because it's very historical. But you know what? Watch the scene where he, at the beginning of the movie, has found that lieutenant's grave at Arlington. And he's bent down on the ground. And you can just see the silhouette, his wife. And you can see the 3 children kind of off in the background. And you know what he says? With everything, now this is a life he's lived, a long life. He said, was it worth? Was I a good man? Was I a good man? And his wife looked at him and said, honey, you were a wonderful man. It was well worth it. So that's the synopsis of our life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And on that wonderful note, absolutely. Go ahead, Kelly.
Sorry. Millie's here listening with me, and she has a question for John.
Sure.
May I? Go ahead.
Hi, Millie.
Right. Hey, you said if somebody is dying and they're not going to wake up, that they can still hear you talking to them?
Absolutely. Talk to a medical doctor. Don't talk to me, because I certainly am not. Sometimes I walk through nursing homes and because I've just walked through, I have a lot of freedom as a chaplain. People will say, "Are you the doctor?" And I'll go, "Do I look smart enough to be a doctor?" And they'll laugh. I'll go, "No, I'm just a chaplain. I just come in here to love you up. I just come here to say hello. I just come here to say it's going to be all right." But yes, I'm not a, whatever you want to call me. I'm very,
Yeah.
what I think. What's that?
He wasn't dead. He hadn't gone yet, but he wasn't going to wake up. And I was still talking to him.
Good.
He was in bed. He died in the VA hospital, and I didn't know if he could still hear me up until we turned the machines off.
You know what? There's 50 or 60 of the stories I have that would tell you that he could hear. Why do you think, and I think I talked about it, Kathy, when we first started talking about nursing care, when you said you were associated with nursing homes, what is it they do when people are close to passing? They have a TV on.
Music.
They play Christian music. Now, why do they do that? They do that because they know that, and they do this for a living. They know that person can still hear.
Yeah.
There's nothing greater than to say it's going to be okay. I had a gentleman who passed away in a VA nursing home. He was just a guy full of life. He was just fun. And when they said he had passed, I came in and I walked into his room, and there was his two daughters, probably in their 60s, laying in the bed with him, side by side, still talking to him. And they said, "Chaplain, we've been talking to our father about our vacations for the last 3 hours." Sometime in that 3 hours, he went away. He left us. So, yeah, you got to know, love is unexplainable. Love is an action word. You can't earn love. You can't buy love. Love is just what it is. It's just something that's immeasurable. So, yeah, I guarantee there was somebody heard something. Of course, I talk a lot. Forgive me.
That's perfectly okay. I can't think of better conversation. I really, really can't. Because I think in your words, John, I think a lot of people will feel more comfort, especially if they were there at end of life with their loved one. They will feel comfort for the words they said as their loved one lay there dying. They will feel comfort in just being there with them. They will feel comfort if all they could do was speak to them by phone. But there is without a doubt people out there that will listen to this episode and feel great comfort from your words. And so on that note, I really, really hate signing off, but we must. So to our listeners out there, take care of yourselves. We always talk about self-care. It is vital to your future, to your healing, to your journey. Take care of yourself. Find comfort in whatever you can. Words from our podcast episodes, words from a book, support conversation from your neighbors. Finding good people to support you, that do support you, is a great way to take care of yourself. And please, please, please remember that we will post John's contact information in the podcast notes. You are free to reach out to him. I do hope you will consider buying his books. If you've enjoyed the stories he has told us here, then you will certainly enjoy his words. And I guarantee in the spaces between his words is so much love and compassion. So good night now for everyone. Stay well. Take care. Come back again next time as we all continue to live and grieve.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.